One of the things that I have been very, very guilty of at countless times in my life is living under this false illusion that whatever's next is way better than anything I could actually do right now. That it's in what's around the corner that I'm going to find true meaning. It's in what's next that I'm going to find fulfillment. And it's in what's to come that I'll find exactly what it is that I have been looking for. That what is to come and what happens just occasionally is way better than anything that I could choose to do right now. See, the way this has actually played out for me in my life looks like this. I remember in elementary school sitting on the back row of the left section of the University Church auditorium. And I remember sitting there with my mom and dad, and I would have a good bird's eye view of our youth group. And I would see them sitting on those first few rows, and I remember also hearing announced their retreats that they would go to, events like this that they would get to attend. I would hear the Sunday night devotionals that they would load up on the bus, and I would watch them in the parking lot, hop on that bus, and go to that house. And I kept thinking, man, I just can't wait to get to high school to get to experience that, because when I get to high school and I'm around all of those people, then things are going to start to change. So I get to high school and I'm in the youth group and I experience those Sunday night devotionals. I get to go on those youth retreats. And if you were here last night, you heard me share with you that all I could think about in high school was when I get to college, when I get to go to Tuesday night devotional, when I get to go to chapel every day, when I get to go on those events that Faulkner organizes, then that's really when things are going to change. And so then when I was at Faulkner, all I could think about was, well, maybe it's actually when I get married. See, when I get married, then I'll start to take things really serious and things will start to change. And this really has nothing actually to do with what I'm talking about tonight, but I will go ahead and tell you that one of the greatest things that I hear that is another false illusion in my premarital counseling is those struggles that people have. They think that when they get married, it'll just magically disappear. So I thought when I get married, then things will get better, and then I'll take things more seriously when it comes to my walk, because I'll need to, because God has called me to lead my wife in the same way that Christ leads his church. And then I get married. And I think, well, no, what's going to happen is when I have kids, then that's when things are going to start to get better. That's when things are going to change. And the reason is I'm going to be forced into a position of leadership. And so from Deuteronomy 6 standpoint, I have to take this serious. So when I have kids, that's when things will start to change. Do you see what's happening here? And I realized like two things were actually happening. Number one, I was actually wishing away the current season that I was in and not really enjoying it. But the second thing I started to realize, I was focused on occasionally what God wants to do daily in my life. A lot of times we live under this picture that the prize of life, the opportunity of change, that when life will really begin is in what happens to me occasionally. It's that next big youth retreat. It's that next time at camp. It's that next big youth rally. That's when things are going to get better. And so we think that what the prize of life is what you and I choose to do occasionally. But what I want to tell you tonight is that's not at all true. That the prize of life is not what we choose to do occasionally, but it's what we choose to do daily for the glory of God. I want to tell you a story tonight. It's about this man named Daniel. That not only did Daniel understand this principle, but Daniel lived it out so incredibly well. So when you think of Daniel, you think of this guy that if he were here today, maybe he was in your school, he was in your youth group, he would have been in Babylon High School's Who's Who. He would have been Mr. Babylon. He would have been most popular. He would have probably been most athletic by the way we see him eating in the first few chapters of Daniel. But one of the things that you think about when you look at his life is you see this guy that rose to the top. You see him being that who's who. You see him having a lot of leadership, a lot of responsibility, tons of people looking up to him, but it doesn't stop there. It's not just the fact that a lot of people looked up to Daniel that we admire. It's also the fact that Daniel showed courage in a time where a lot of us would just flat out quit or walk away. And so we see this guy rising to the top. We see this courage that he is obviously exhibiting. And so when we see that in Daniel, we think, well, what was it about him that got him from here to there? And what we oftentimes will do is we'll think maybe it's a goal. Maybe it's a resolution that Daniel had for himself. And there's nothing wrong with goals. There's nothing wrong with resolutions. But I would argue that really what it was for Daniel was this. It wasn't a goal that he had in his life. It wasn't a resolution in his life. But it was a system, a discipline, a rhythm that he had. So because one thing I want you to know is that you and I will never just always rise to the level of a goal. But we will rise to the level of a system. Or fall to that lack thereof. So when you look at Daniel's life, you notice that he had this system in place. And obviously, the more you look at him in these moments of pressure when a lot of us would quit, you start to see, systems, rhythms, disciplines will always trump goals and resolutions. And we see this in the courage that he showed, because we probably all think, all right, when I get to a moment of pressure, when I get to a time of crisis, when I'm in the middle of a time of temptation, when that time comes, then I will definitely show courage. But that's what you'll notice about Daniel, and that's what we have to understand and be honest with when it comes to ourselves, and it's this, that courage is not just something you muster up and conjure up in the moment of a crisis. That courage is actually something that we develop through a lifetime of small, consistent rhythms. See, what courage really is actually this pattern that you start to program in your heart. And the way I explained it the other day when I was at Madison was basically, if you go on Google, one of the things that you'll notice is it has this feature. It's called autofill. You know what I'm talking about? Like, so the moment you begin to type something and you type one letter, it'll actually start to pick a bunch of stuff based on you. Based on your prior searches, based on your prior conversations with people, they hear you. All of those kinds of things. And so what happened to me is I was at the house and I was getting ready to install an above-the-range microwave, and I didn't know how to do it. That tells you a lot about me. And so I get on Google, and I was getting ready to type how to install an above-the-range microwave. And so I put an H. And I had just had a conversation with Cruz because he said, Dad, can we go hiking? And I said, yes, we can go hiking very soon. And then on another computer, not even this one, I had actually looked up hiking gear. And so the moment I typed an H, getting ready to say how to install above-the-range microwave, guess what it showed? Hiking in North Alabama, hiking in Madison, hiking gear. It auto-filled that because why? It knows me. I've created a pattern and it knows probably what I'm going to walk down. That's what happens with courage. We think, well, in that moment, in the time of crisis, in the time of temptation, I'm going to be really courageous. No, that's not how that works. It's a path you have to continually be walking down. Then when that moment of crisis comes, you're not pulling out of nowhere. It's kind of like when Michael Jordan used to say in that really famous quote, people do not believe me when I would tell them that I practiced just as hard as I played. He said the reason why I did that is these people that don't practice hard, they're trying to pull out of empty space where there is nothing. But if you practice hard, you truly do play like you practice because you're pulling out of this path you've walked down. See, did you know that in your brain you actually have something that's called a neurological pathway? And the idea behind a neurological pathway is if you walk down something long enough, it'll actually create a space to where it's easier to walk that way. Here's an example. Maybe at your house, you have a beautiful front lawn. And where you have to park your car, it would be a lot easier for you to cut through the grass to get the front door, but your dad wants to keep the yard looking beautiful, so he asks you to walk around. And it's a lot harder to walk around, and you keep thinking, man, I really would like to walk down it. And so you walk down it once. You're like, things don't look too bad. Walk down another time. And what you'll start doing is you'll start walking down, and that path will start to get a little wider and a little bit wider, and then it'll start to show up, and your dad's like, excuse me, remember what I told you? Like, I told you not to walk down this path, and so you're like, okay, now I'm going to have to walk around. But here's the thing, you want that pathway to start growing up, to look something beautiful again. And here's what happens. It takes time to walk around that path, and it takes time for those things to start to grow. That's what happens in those pathways in your life. That if you walk down something for a while, you're going to create that path, and it's going to be way easier to walk down it. But in order for good things to grow, you're going to have to be intentional about walking consistently in the other way. That's why I want to tell you tonight that courage is not what we've taken it to be. And what I mean by that, courage is not an act. Courage is a habit. It's a pattern that is being programmed into your heart. So what I want to do tonight is I want to take you to Daniel 6. And the context of Daniel 6 is this. Nebuchadnezzar is no longer king. Belshazzar is no longer king. There's a guy that's now ruling named King Darius. And so what you're noticing here in Daniel is they're going from one administration to the next administration to another administration. And if you've ever watched anything with politics, when we go from one president to another president, one of the things that you will probably remember is when the new president comes in, when he gets into the White House, y'all know what he does, right? He cleans house. All these people that were there before, he gets rid of them. That's what was happening during this day too. And so Daniel then comes, he's in this kingdom, and King Darius is getting ready to completely clean house with what Belshazzar left and what Nebuchadnezzar left. And he's getting ready to start all over from the very beginning, ground up. And he's like, whoa, hold on a second. That was my plan, but I'm looking in this kingdom right now, and man, there's this guy, Daniel. I know we usually get rid of the janitor, and I know we usually get rid of Congress, and I know we usually get rid of this czar and that czar, and the things can go on and on. I know that's usually what we do, but there's something about this Daniel, and you'll notice in the text it says this, that there was this excellent spirit that was within him. And what's interesting about that word excellent spirit is the way it's translated in a lot of text is that there was this attitude about him. And I remember when I played basketball, we had this little cheesy saying on a t-shirt that attitude determines altitude. And it is cheesy, but man, is that not true? And so there was something about this Daniel. Well, those other guys in the kingdom that saw Daniel rising to the top, and these other guys in the kingdom that saw Daniel getting so much attention, they didn't like it. So they decided, you know what? We want to get rid of and we want to kill the teacher's pet. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to spy on Daniel's life. And so we're going to watch him, we're going to get our binoculars out, and we're going to see what he does, we're going to see what he texts, we're going to see what he tweets, we're going to get on Facebook, and we're going to try to find something wrong with this guy and something he does to accuse him. And this makes me think of every time there's an election, y'all have probably noticed that they will dig in the past of whoever that person is that's in the opposite party, and they will try to find something, anything. And they will twist it and build it into something. They'll 30 years ago, he, sided with Big Time Nursery and stole candy from babies. And so we remember when that happened. And then I started to think, if somebody did this to me and started looking in my past and my social media posts, I don't know if they would think, well, he's a terrible guy. They would just think, man, that guy's weird. Because just the other day in a Facebook mirror, I'm really? Did people care that I picked up my dog from the groomer? You look back in your past and you can find something with you. They looked at Daniel, they couldn't find anything, and if you look there in verse 5, they said the only thing that we could think of about Daniel had to do with his connection with the law of his God. When we look at Daniel, the only thing that we can notice is this guy has a relationship with God. I want to ask you tonight, with a watching world looking at you, when they look at you, they say, man, when I look at them, the only thing I could say is, man, they've got an amazing, heartfelt, true connection with God. Would they say that about you? That's what they said about Daniel. And so they came up with this plan. They said, all right, he's obviously very close to God. And this is not mentioned in the text, but it's alluded to later on in the next few verses. Is that when they pulled out those binoculars and they were spying from the rooftops, they noticed that Daniel 3 times a day was praying. And by the way, Daniel was not doing that to draw attention to himself. He didn't know they were looking in. Daniel was just doing what Daniel always did. And by the way, I think it's so cool that right now, thousands of years removed from this text, we're all standing or sitting here talking about this guy. And if he would have chosen to blend in and to do what everybody else did, he would be forgotten. But he chose to be faithful with the rhythms of his life, and now he's remembered. Isn't that kind of cool? And so Daniel is doing what he always does. And these other guys that want to get rid of Daniel end up going to the king, and they say, King, we've got this great idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to sign this new law that whoever bows down or prays to or worships any other being or God besides you, if they do that, they're going to be killed. And see, King, the reason why this is such a good idea is this will bring some continuity to the kingdom. And we're in a time of transition going from Nebuchadnezzar to Belshazzar now to you. So this will kind of help everybody be focused in one direction. You know what? He loved it, but it also tapped into his pride, so he signed it. And the reason why this is such a big deal is during this day, if a king signed a law, it was irrevocable. It could not be changed. And the reason why they made this a law during this day is that kings were very guilty of making silly, arbitrary, ridiculous laws. In fact, one of the things that I read is that during this day, there was actually a law that had been put into place where the king said that there should be no left-handed people. And I really think that basically what happened, they were out playing pickleball and some guy beating that was left-handed, he's like, off with you, you know. And so no more left-handed people. And so they decided to make this change in how they approach law so that the kings would always know that when you sign it, it cannot be changed. Darius knew it could not be changed, and he knew Daniel, but he still decided to sign it. What I'm saying is this: pride will do that too. And so this law was signed to say that somebody like Daniel cannot pray to God, cannot worship to God. So Daniel hears of this law, and y'all want to know what Daniel did? When he found out that he couldn't pray before God, he got his phone out. He got on Twitter, and under 280 characters, he just land blasted and really gave it to the government for this decision that he could no longer pray before God. I'm just kidding. He actually got on Facebook, and he made this post that the apocalypse is coming. And the king is a mean king, and I'm going to show him, and we're going to do what we're going to, right? No, it says that when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house, went to the upper chamber, opened up his windows, and he faced the very people that made the law against him. He thanked God. Let that sit in for just a second. He thanked God, and he prayed for them 3 times a day, like he had occasionally done, right? No, what he had previously done. What I love so much about this is I can point to countless times in my life where a discipline in my life was basically born out of crisis, or a discipline of prayer and fasting and worship was created out of a time of a big-time choice or a decision. That's okay and all, and I'm not saying that necessarily bad, but you have to notice what I talked about earlier is that where does courage come from? It's not what we do occasionally, it's what we do daily. What I love about Daniel is this, that the crisis that Daniel had in his life did not create this rhythm, this discipline. But this crisis actually revealed the rhythm that he already had in place. What's your way when crisis comes? What do you do when you've gotten off rhythm? Did you actually know psychologists and psychiatrists have studied this, and they say the 3 most popular reactions from people in the United States when difficulty comes are these 3 things. Number 1, panic. Panic. Oh no, this is, the people in charge are saying this, and so I guess we're going to have to do this. And also, we really seem to be stuck between 2 poor choices, and everybody's doing, so I guess I need to do it. And I guess this is just who I'm going to be. And I think about 1 Corinthians 10, where the Bible says that God is faithful, and he will always provide you a way out. We're not always stuck between 2 bad choices. Yeah, there's what seems and perceives to just be option A and B, but if you look close enough, I promise you, because the Bible says it, and God is faithful, that he provides also an option C. There's always a way out. That's why I love that quote too about leadership, that leaders, they never panic. They just pivot. The second thing that they said is this, that what oftentimes also happens is pride begins to set in. And this is a very difficult one for us as Christians, because sometimes we think pride is the exact same thing as bold faith, because sometimes they can actually look similar. You're like, wait, what are you talking about? Because like when crisis comes, we say, well, I got this, and I can do it on my own, and I can make it. Like, wow, that's amazing. Do you see the faith of that guy? He says he's got this. Well, so how can I tell the difference between pride and bold faith? Well, if you peel back the layers of your response to a time of crisis, to a time of interruption, you find these two things. Here's how you can tell it's pride. When you peel back that first layer and you see self-sufficiency, it's pride. But if you also peel back another layer and you look beneath the surface and you start to see prayerlessness, I'm telling you, a lack of prayer in your life is like the check engine light of your heart saying your heart has gone proud. And you're like, no, it's not, because really, as we think about it, prayer is just all about self-discipline. It's kind of like, me needing to eat spinach or kale more, alpha sprouts more, or exercising more. No, prayer in its root and its need in our life is not so much about self-discipline, but I want to tell you it's all about pride. And the reason is a lack of prayer is a indicator that your heart's gone proud, because what really means is that I don't need God and I can do this on my own. I don't need to include him in this. I can handle it myself. And that is a very, very dangerous place to be, because I will tell you that the more proud and the prouder your heart gets, you'll start to notice very quickly, no one even has to point it out, that your heart is getting further and further and further and further and further and further away from God. But then the flip side is also true, that the closer you get to God through prayer, you'll start to notice the more humble, the more meek, and the more broken you start to be. They said the third way that a lot of people respond to crisis is preemptive strike. This is the idea of, well, I'll show them. You do this, I'll do that. You respond this way, I'll respond that way. I'll really put them in their place and I will show them. These are the three most common responses, but what did Daniel choose? He chose prayer. And as you work through this text, one of the things that is just so cool to me that sticks out is the obvious peace that Daniel has. And you know why? Because he understands he is yoked with God. Prayer is you and I being yoked with the creator of this universe. That's why it gives peace. I've always liked the example of thinking of prayer like you have been put into a room that is pitch black and you can't see anything that's in front of you. But you know inside that room that you're in that there is actually furniture all in the room. There's a lamp that's on a table. There's a couch. There's a bed. There's a nightstand. And you can't see a thing. And so since you can't see a thing in that room, how are you walking in that room? Well, I'll tell you how you're walking. You're walking very timidly. Instead of walking big, confident, bold steps, you're walking very timid steps. You're sliding, and as you slide your feet, your toe's going to hit the edge of a table, and it's going to stub. And then you're going to slide your feet over here, and you're going to knock over a lamp, and then glass is going to go everywhere. And then you're going to even walk more cautiously, more timidly, because you can't see. So you keep sliding your feet, barely moving around the room, no confidence. And all of a sudden, as you reach your hand out, you feel what is fabric, and you realize that it's a curtain, so you yank it back. So all of a sudden, light comes in the room, and what was dark is now light. Now, how are you walking in that room? I'll tell you how you're walking. You're walking very confidently. Why? Because you can see. That's what prayer does for us. It's that window into our world where light can bring light into a very dark situation. Where we were previously walking very timidly, we're now walking very confidently, not because of us, but because of who we're yoked with. That's the blessing. That's the value of prayer. I want to ask you tonight, what is your way What is the way you respond? And here's why this matters. The ways that you let in your life will always be the ways that you're set in. And it's kind of like I used to hear people say, well, you're just going through the motions. And yes, usually going through the motions is bad if that motion is bad and if that motion is detached from a heart that is wanting relationship with God. But I want to go ahead and tell you tonight that if you are going through the right motions, the right rhythms, and that heart is attached to relationship with God, that's a good rhythm. The way that you let in your life is going to be the way that you're set in. So the king had signed this law, and so he couldn't change it. And so the king was getting ready to throw Daniel into the lion's den, and I noticed a few weeks ago that it says twice in here. I never noticed this before, but twice it says this in the text. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God whom you serve occasionally," right? No, the God whom you serve, what? Continually deliver you. And so he throws him in the lion's den, and then you notice that night that nobody in Babylon can sleep. They're all rolling over in their bed. Nobody seems to be able to sleep that night except for the guy that's in the lion's den. And so the king gets up early that morning to see if Daniel's alive, and notice what the text goes on to say. So he got near the den where Daniel was. He cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God," and here it is again, "whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lion's den?" And of course, we know this man that has been yoked with God lets King Darius and everybody in Babylon know that his God reigns. I want to give you a few points from this text, and it's this. We all want courage in those moments of crisis. And we think it's going to be something we just muster up in the moment. But that courage that we all want to have in the lion's den, it actually comes from a place. And for Daniel, it was consistency for him in that prayer closet. That one of the things that I've always loved is this quote, and it's this, that the evening of life is determined by the morning of it. It's the things that you do in the very beginning of your day. It's the things that you do in the very beginning of your life. It's the things that you do consistently that result in the things that we all want to be, all the things that we want to achieve. And if you look at Daniel's life and you want to know, like, how was that guy in the moment of crisis been able to do something so great? It was this. His success was directly connected to what I like to call pre-decisions. Daniel had pre-decided, walked down this path in his mind. He knew, I'm in a secular culture where sometimes people are going to choose against what I want, but I've been praying so much that no matter what happens, my attitude is always solid because I've walked down this so many times. That courage that we all want, it comes from a place, the path that we continue to walk down. So that's why I always used to tell young people that, like, when you go on a date and you think, all right, when I go on that date, I hope it goes well. But then you get on that date and then pressure starts to mount. And you're like, oh man, I hope I'm going to be pure on that date. I want you to know if that's when you decide that, you've already lost that battle. It's what you've decided a long time ago. The second thing I want to tell you is this, and this is something Daniel understood, is that even when he was young, he understood, I don't know how much time I have left. See, guys, I want you to understand something, and you really have to get this, and this is so hard to understand now, and it's hard for me to understand too. Time is not on our side. What I love about Daniel is he did not have the mentality I had, well, when I get to high school, well, then I get to college, when I get married, when I have kids, then, and then the prize is what I do occasionally. If you go to Daniel 1, when he was a young guy, he prayed before God about how to handle this situation with forbidden foods. And when you get to Daniel 2, when the king has this dream that he needs to be interpreting, he's not pulling from nothing, he's pulling from something. And so his first inclination when he has this request is to go before God in prayer. And his prayer life was evidently so solid that it rubbed off on his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in chapter 3. What you notice about Daniel is he understood, you know what? I don't know how much time I have left, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I know I have right now. And so he prayed. And he made this a consistent part of his life. You know, the Bible talks about time in two ways. It uses this word chronos, and the other word it uses is kairos. And chronos is like literal time, like, you know, tomorrow I'm going to do this, or in 5 minutes we're going to do this. Next week we have this planned. That's how we talk about time very often. But did you know the Bible doesn't use chronos very much? Most of the time when the Bible talks about time, it uses kairos, which basically refers to time as opportunity. Please hear me on this. Time is not on your side. We don't need to measure it in days, maybe just heartthrobs. See it as an opportunity. I want to give you this little illustration. So I looked up what the average lifespan is of a human being, and it equals these marbles in here. That each one of these marbles represents a week of your life. Now, this is average. And I know this is like, oh, that's depressing. But the reality is, and this is hard but true, that a lot of us won't even get to this. I pray we all have more opportunities to serve. And I pray we all have more opportunities to pour into other people. But this is the average. So I want to show you real quick how much time has passed once you've gotten to kindergarten. That's kindergarten. There's about to be some mamas that are about to cry, I think. That's your senior year in high school. Now, the reason why I'm showing you this is not to be like, well, that's depressing and that's discouraging. But when we focus on how much time, kairos, we actually have, we tend to make things that matter even more. You know, one of the things that I love that Philip Brookman shared was how the book of Psalms was really used for two things for the early church. It was used as a songbook. It was also used as a prayer book. And Psalms really is like the soul's prayer book, because if you don't know what to pray, I feel like there's a psalm for it. And this psalm, Psalm 90:12, is a prayer that I want us to pray right now. And this is what this prayer says. God, teach me to number my days so I can have a heart of wisdom. Let's pray that together right now. Will y'all repeat after me? Dear God. Let's try that again. Dear God, help me to number my days so I can have a heart of wisdom. The third thing that I'm going to share with you tonight is this. Is that we love the idea of what we're going to become, what we're going to be. But future you is just an exaggerated version of current you. Like, we really love the idea of what am I going to be one day? And I even remember my little sister, she loved to sketch out what her wedding dress was going to look like one day. And she would actually draw it out. And she likes to do floral arrangements, and I think that's what they're called, things like that. And so she would even show what the bridesmaids would be holding. I mean, she was so detailed about what that day would be. And guys won't admit this to you. I mean, they don't draw the dress, and I hope not, that'd be weird. But they do draw out in their minds, like, who is it going to be that I'm going to marry? Like, what is she going to look like? And where are we going to live? Like, we all kind of wonder, like, what is it going to be in the future? Who am I going to be? And in the way we speak of the future is almost like the future is mysterious. Like, we have no clue what we're going to be. Well, around 2012 to 15, there was this app that is in the Apple App Store and in the Android App Store that went viral on Facebook, and it's called Aging Booth. And basically what you do is you take a picture of yourself, you enter it into this, and you press start, and it fast forwards like 30, 40 years to see what you're going to look like in the future. Your parents love this on Facebook. And so they downloaded the app and put pictures in because they wanted people in another country to get their information. So you put in this picture and you press start. And so I wanted people to know my information too, so I did this. And it turns out in 2055, I look like Colonel Sanders, so that's me. And I couldn't help myself, so I decided to keep going with different people. And our wonderful youth minister at Madison, and by the way, Lindsay is going to be a very blessed woman. There's Jordan in 2057. Well, I still couldn't help myself. And one of my dear friends from a place that I absolutely love, Robertsdale, Dylan Wyatt. And I've always thought Dylan's just going to be one of those guys that's just going to age just incredibly well. And man, it was right when I put his picture in. Those chiseled abs and studded features are just amazing on that guy. Anyways, if you weren't here last night, but anyway, all right. But we love the idea of like, what am I going to be in the future? What am I going to look like? What am I going to become? And again, we act like it's so mysterious. Here's what I want you to know. It's not. Future you is just an exaggerated version of current you. That's what this Bible verse is about. Like, here's what I want to tell you. If you are a nice person now, the Bible talks about what is called this principle of plant and harvest. You reap what you sow. And what we usually think is that if you plant something, it's just going to become identical to what I planted. That is not the idea of reaping and sowing. The idea of reaping and sowing is that what you plant, the harvest itself is bigger, grander than the planting itself. And so what I'm saying is, if you are a nice person now, you are going to bloom and grow into a nicer person later. But if you're mean and rude all the time, stank face, every time someone sees you, what's going to happen is you're going to grow into an even meaner, ruder person later. Do you see what happens according to that principle? That the harvest is always greater than the planting itself. Whatever you are choosing right now is what you're going to be. You're like, well, I want to know who I'm going to marry. Who are you surrounding yourself with? What kind of job am I going to have one day? Well, what kind of disciplines are you showing in school right now? It's not that mysterious. Future you is just an exaggerated version of current you. Well, I disagree, Andrew. Time will tell. No, time does not reveal that we're going to be so different. Usually what time does, time doesn't change us. Time, more than anything, just reveals more of who we are, but also more of who we're becoming. Future you is just an exaggerated version of current you. And the final thing that I want to end with tonight is this. That what you'll notice in Daniel's life that helped him to rise in that moment of crisis is this. That it's that ongoing consistency that is way more important than that short-term intensity. That one of the things that I've noticed in my life, and I probably have noticed this with you too, and you've noticed it even yourself, that we give up way too quickly. That we'll read our Bible one night, and we're like, all right, I read my Bible tonight, and we wake up and we're like, man, I didn't become a man of God overnight. And so because I didn't become a man of God overnight, I'm going to walk away. The process of success spiritually is oftentimes slow. And I'm not negating what God can do in a big way. Please understand. But I'm just talking about Daniel here for a second. That the growth spiritually that we all want sometimes is slow. It definitely doesn't speed up by giving up quickly. Or giving up too soon. Or walking away before you get some type of success. A few years ago, they did a study in Australia, and they took 900 Australians, and they divided that group of 900 Australians into two different groups. And for half the group, what they ended up doing is they gave one group SPF 50. And they said, what we want to do is we want you to put SPF 50, which is a very powerful SPF. And what we want you to do is anytime you go outside in the sunshine to play on the beach or whatever, we want you to put that on. So to the other group, what we want you to do is we want you to put on SPF 15, but we want you to put that on every single day. Even if it's cloudy, even if the sun is not that bright. So one group is going to put on something higher occasionally, but the other group is going to put on something actually a little bit lower daily. And so after 5 years, what we want to do is before and after pictures, and we want to see which group ages quicker. Turns out that the group of people that put on the higher SPF 50 occasionally aged way quicker than the group of people that put on the SPF that was lower occasionally. I guess what I'm saying with all of this is what's true of your skin is also true of your soul. I remember when I was a kid, my mom, when I would make faces at my sister in the back seat, and I don't know about y'all, like our rearview mirror never faced the road. It always pointed to the back of our Buick LeSabre. And I would always make faces at her and, different things. And I don't know if y'all even did like this one. That'll be on social media. That's good. All right. And one of the things that my mom would always say when I would make faces at Haley is she said, if you keep making that face, it's going to get what? Turns out it did, But she would always say that. But if you think about it spiritually speaking, that we wonder a lot of times, what's the life going to be that I'm going to have one day? What's the life I'm going to get stuck with? Well, I want to tell you tonight, the life that you're going to get stuck with later is exactly the life you're making right now. We all have a way. So I want to ask you tonight, do you like the ways that you're letting in your life? Because those ways you're letting in right now. I'm not talking about in high school. I'm not talking about in college. I'm not talking about when you're married. I'm talking about like right now. The ways that you're walking in are just going to become exaggerated later on. Do you like the life you're going to get stuck with? So if you're here tonight and you have a need, and you want to grow spiritually, you want to get back in rhythm with God. And maybe for some of you, it's to confess sin. You've built up that wall like we talked about yesterday. Maybe for some of you, you've never made the decision to put on Christ in baptism. Ryan is about to lead us in an invitation song. We're all going to stand. And then if you have a need, please, please come now while we stand and we sing the song together. Hide me.